Hey, fellow Geoteers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So we're still chopping away at our 9 things that will fuck up your life. We took this little detour to talk about what are these things fucking up? What are these things obstacles towards? And we've been kind of like exploring different aspects of that. Last episode, we also had done these things of talking about meditative techniques. And one of the ones we had mentioned was meditating on letters. And we had taken that chance to talk a little Kabbalah, which we haven't done too much of.
Not really.
Yeah, not too much. So that's kind of waiting in the offing to do, which I mean, just shows you, goes to show you how rich these subject matters are. We haven't even scratched the surface.
Hmm.
We've been going at this for some years now. But I said I was going to do meditation on the 72 names of God. I was planning on doing that, which is one of these Kabbalistic meditations. We meditate on letters and the sequences of letters that are sort of encoded in the parting of the Red Sea story. And so I did it. And I was going to share our meditative experiences. This is like sharing a meditative experience episode in a way, but also kind of, I think, to my mind, connected back to the 9 obstructions or the 9 things that will fuck up your life. So, anyways, I was doing it, Daniel. I didn't do it exactly in the window I wanted to do it. I was going to time it up with the calendar a little bit better, but it didn't work out so perfect. I just had like, I couldn't do it in that window of time, but I did get to it, and I hadn't done them in a while as seriously as I was going to do it now. I have done different kinds of Kabbalistic letter meditations over the years. We both love meditation. So if there's a way to do it, I'll do it and I'll see what it does. But this particular one I hadn't done in a little bit. So I had a very interesting experience. I started to do it, and you do these little trios of letters, um, Hebrew or Aramaic letters, and they just come in these little sets of 3. And like we talked about, there's these kind of head motions that go along with each of the letters, depending on the vowel sound of the letter. So that's kind of the gist of how the meditation works. And I was using sort of one of the Madonna Kabbalah books, which I don't always do.
Mm.
They kind of just show the sequences. Each one you turn a page, they'll give you another one of the trios. And it's kind of an interesting take because it tries to tap into, as we talked about in the other episode, it tries to tap into issues you might have in your life. So I have done it where I focused in on one particular one because I felt like, oh, this is a problematic point. This trio of letters addresses this, so let me do that. That's an interesting experience, but this is just more like doing all of them. So you do all the 72 things like in this sequence. Takes maybe, depends on how fast you do it, maybe takes an hour and a half, maybe if you go long or something. But I probably did it a little bit faster. But anyways, it's a kind of a powerful experience because I hadn't done it in a while. And so I started off, and they create a kind of an interesting thing where you almost feel this immediate influx that comes in. They have some word for that in the Kabbalah, this feeling of influx. So you really feel like this energy kind of pours into you. And it happened like pretty quickly. I got like a couple of the sequences in, and it was like whoosh. I felt this thing. And it felt like it wanted to like clarify my mind very much so. Like it was trying to create inner clarity in a very strong way. And I was going through and I was looking at, again, my little Madonna Kabbalah book as I was turning the pages to do each letter. And I would sort of like skim a little bit what each letter was supposed to be about. I kind of know them, but it was something where I was like looking at them again for the first time in a long time. And the interesting experience I wanted to share for the podcast is what jumped out at me. I got the influx and it was like, oh, my mind's getting very clear. It's powerful. And as I was going through, I was looking at, I was going, a lot of these things have to do with feelings of guilt, shame, self-reproach. And I was doing them and I thought, God, I'm not feeling those things at all now. And I tried to flash back, I guess, when I was doing those meditations all the time. And I don't remember that jumping out at me so prominently. It must have felt more natural at the time or something. But I was doing that, thought like, I'm not feeling in my life, I don't feel those things. And I thought, well, that's curious. Why is that like that? And I continued on through the sequences. And I can't remember if it hit me while I was doing the meditation. Maybe it did. But I started thinking, okay, why don't I feel these things? Why don't I feel these really like guilts and shames is what I wanted to throw out as an episode subject matter. And I thought, the reason why is because I've clarified aspects of myself and how I think about the world. And so I don't have those same guilts and shames because I'm just more honest with the world and with people. And so I had this realization that the reason why I was having those feelings before usually had to do with something where I just wasn't being honest with myself and others. I wasn't being, we could use our favorite word, authentic, but I just wasn't being real. And some of that was more in my personal life. We've talked about these kinds of things a lot. And my feeling of like liking the uniqueness thing. I don't necessarily believe in, standard, relationship model, exclusivity, monogamy things. And that was a big subject matter last year for us. So some of it had to do with that. Some of it had to do with other things. But I realized like, no, I don't have that same feelings of like, ugh, shame and guilt and bad feelings just because I'm just much more straight and authentic in who I am. And I think there was sort of a process of me getting to be that. But I just found that to be like incredibly interesting. And it made me start thinking about how much guilt and shame people carry. So I'll throw it back to you. I don't know. What do you think of the experience? I'll just, you can kind of tell me what you think. No,
Yeah, so I
I'll
feel
know
like,
about this more, but it was interesting for me.
yeah. So thanks for sharing. I think it's an interesting place to start. And we can, you've done this practice as well as I have. There are some introductory practices in, you know, Tibetan Buddhism where they work on purification as like the beginning, not the very beginning, but everything has some level of purification on it, right? So,
Mhm.
and and I think for those who have absolutely no familiarity with what I'm saying, it's as if like before you go to bed, and if you've had a long day, you probably take a shower, right? You're sweaty, you're gonna, right? Or if you're going to have a good night of sexy time with your partner, whoever your partner may be, we don't know.
Partner, partner.
Partners, they're not here. See, that's not exclusive.
Yeah,
That's
right
very
there.
unique.
We have to say that. You know what I mean?
That's right. We should. I would
Got
love
my
to say that. To go to bed
got
with
my
my
poly
partners.
friends.
That's right. My new
Give a shout
friend.
out to my poly friends, right?
That's right. Shout out
Partners.
to
Yeah,
my partners.
yeah,
Um, you would probably, I hope, take a shower, you know, clean up a little bit, right?
yeah. It's
Uh,
it's an etiquette and politeness thing, and yeah,
there you go. And
makes you
along
more attractive. Makes you more
that,
attractive.
sure.
Mhm.
And so, in this way, then when a person is, moving down a spiritual path, a lot of times the beginning practices are purification type practices. And one of the ones that you and I both have done also have this purification aspect to it. And for myself personally, when I started, doing those things, I wanted to focus on things that I was to forgive, people, actions, inactions, right? I know we talked long ago about it, kind of like got your eyebrows to raise. I said I had regret over things not that I did do, but that in my life that I didn't,
Oh
you
yeah.
know?
Uh-huh.
And in the process of doing that kind of purification practices, a lot of it was dealing with, shame and guilt from things that I had done.
Mhm.
And so asking for forgiveness for myself. And eventually I got to a point where like I was having to really dig much more deeply to find things to where it became almost a distraction because I was like, this stuff should come to the surface. And in the beginning, it totally did, like how you were saying. Like it totally was like you're overwhelmed. You're like, oh man, I'm fucking up all the time. Like, holy shit, this is a super long list. I'll never be done with this.
Yeah.
Um, and then as you go on, you start to go, oh, you know what? This person did something to me that I felt bad. I'm going to forgive them. You know, oh, maybe they felt bad. I want to forgive whatever it is that they got going on. I hope that helps them. I want to lift their guilt. I hope that happens. I hope that, and so you start to work on this kind of compassionate thing. And I'm going to finish this and I'm going to relate to something that I thought was super interesting over the weekend that I had a conversation with someone that I had that relates to this. But as I started to move on, I started to forgive more. My forgiveness was for other people more and more and more, right? My own stuff would come, of course, because I don't want to just totally make this about other people and go, oh, well, I'm a saint. So, no problem. I'm good. Like that's, spiritual materialisticness, um, whatever at his best. You know what I'm saying? The ego pops up and goes, oh yeah, we're good. Let's help everyone else. You know what I'm saying? Like it's
Mhm.
compassion, but it's also, abandoning yourself in the same uh, process. So I wanted to give you a chance to say whatever so
Oh,
that
you had something. Okay, you want to
yeah.
do that response before you kind of flip
Yes.
to the.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the thing that really hit me when I was looking at it for myself, and it made me wonder how often people feel this way,
Mm,
was just, I think the problem that I had before, and maybe we'll bounce around in these different issues as we go through,
sure.
but the problem I had before was more that I wasn't being real enough with myself and others. So I'd find myself in situations where I felt like, like I'm cringing now as I'm trying to like go back to these feelings
Mm,
where I just wasn't being as true to who I am. Whether that was in, aspects of my personal life or aspects in other parts of my life, I wasn't being, it took a while. It takes a while to do this. It's a process, right? And I wasn't, I wasn't, yeah, I wasn't being true to who I was. So I'd find myself in situations where I was like, ugh, there's a conflict between how I really feel and how I'm acting, or there's a conflict between where I really want to go with things and how I'm handling this part of my life, whatever that might be, or I'm interacting with, some family member, but I'm not really being who I am with them, and we're not really being honest with one another, so it's not working.
mm.
Everything had this grind to it. And I think what hit me in doing the meditation, like of this thing that I hadn't done for a while, and really looking at them again and having all these overcoming these bad feelings, especially about the self, were there. And I was like, yeah, I think that's the big difference. I wasn't being real. I wasn't being true. We can use our authentic word or whatever. I wasn't being that way. So I always would find myself in these situations where I'd be like, ugh, I'm like,
Well, Eric,
it's, I feel bad. I would feel bad about because I was torn in what I was doing, and I would feel like I just wasn't being myself.
well,
And I thought
that's
that's an interesting experience for me. I was like, okay, wow, that's weird. You could see the contrast effect,
right. Well,
doing this before, I obviously felt like I wasn't being real, and now I do.
that's a continuation of what we discussed last week, right? The
Yeah,
idea
no, I
of
think
the
that's right.
emotional plague creating this false sense of self.
I think that's where I was going with it.
Right.
Now we can go other directions with it for sure, because sometimes there are things that you have regret about. You're like, I didn't handle that situation right. We all have those things.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
But that's
But
that's
this was
that's
about the incongruence part. Yeah.
right. That I was gonna say that's a different thing of like the sense of like inner congruency between you and yourself, and then you accepting that you are a ever growing and evolving creature who could do things better even seconds after you just did them. You learn from that like instantaneously. You're like, oh shit, I could do that. I could do that better. I could, in fact, I could do it better right now. Like right, like we can we do it again? Like I find myself in, sometimes in
Yeah.
in discussions with my partner or friends, like we'll be in a discussion, having a disagreement or whatever, and I'm just like, oh, I didn't do that well, and I really didn't do it that well, and so sometimes I'll catch it right away, and if whatever, I'll send a message or I'll be like, what, I fucked that up actually. Like I didn't mean what I said was coming from
I didn't put that the right way or whatever, right?
yeah, exactly. Like it just didn't come out right. So I think that's a good reflection, from last week's discussion.
Yeah, I would no way and say that I do everything perfect. Hell's no. But
No,
but it is interesting in the sense of like there was like a definitely like a kind of an underlying pattern thing where if I had to do a purification thing and if I looked back and boiled it down, it was usually because I just wasn't being congruent with myself, and therefore I wasn't being congruent with the environment, and then I would feel like things would go not right, you
sure.
know, and so it just made me think of like I wonder how often people feel that way,
Hmm.
walking around with sort of that feeling of like guilt and shame, right? Because what the real problem is that you're not being who you are. That's the emotional
Right.
plague and all that kind of stuff that Reich was talking about, and Carl Rogers and all these psychologists. So I saw the connection. That's the reason I was going to bring it up in the episode last week,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I was like, yeah. And so as I grew over this period of time, which is probably, I don't know, 17 years or something like that, if I really,
Hmm.
not that I gave up on doing Kabbalistic things along the way, but there was obviously I haven't done it for a while, and the thing was striking. I grew into who I was. I grew into like, well, okay, I'm a Buddhist tantrika. These are my values. I'm like, I've broken away from things that I would otherwise feel inauthentic with other people about. I'm much more genuine, I think. So I feel less of those moments of like, oh, I fucked this up. I don't even feel as much of that, though. Of course, we still do. And then usually I'll go like, hey, fucked it up. Sorry. But even that, it's like less of it because I feel like or at least of the things that are serious, because it's like there's just much more internal congruence. So I
Mm-hmm.
can be more congruent with the environment. But the big shock was retrospectively when I look back at it, why was I feeling those? What would be the situations where I would be feeling those things that I obviously these letters talking about these meditations, even talking about those emotions, they felt very natural to me, I suppose, at the time. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what's the difference? And I was like, okay, it seems like I'm just much more of a, because I'm more congruent with myself, I don't have to be inauthentic to a partner or to, other people in the environment. I'm just much more straight,
Mm-hmm.
maybe think of like the shame and the guilt thing and how often that like maybe stems out of this like inner incongruence that
Mm-hmm.
leads you into situations where you're like, oh, I'm not really being honest with how I am with this person. I'm not being honest with how I really feel about like this part of my work or what, like, you feel these like, and that like, I think leads to those feelings of shame and guilt. Does that make a psychological sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you feel this thing of like, okay, I'm not being authentic. I haven't told this person the truth of what I actually feel. I was talking with another person I know about this, and I said I would reference him, but I won't even say his name. But he was saying, yeah, he kind of got it. He was like, yeah, there's something about that, and he says, I'm trying to do that more. I'm trying to be more honest myself so I don't find myself in those like situations where I feel, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and just breaking out of shame and guilt just in general is such a good thing to be able to do, you know. I was part of that for me was also like I kind of accepted my little Buddhist tantric identity, and I realized like, okay, some of the things that otherwise maybe people would tell me I was supposed to feel shame or guilt about, I don't anymore. I'm not going to feel shame and guilt about those
Right.
things. Let this go. So it's a big change, over the course of the years. And the meditation was still powerful. It wasn't like it wasn't doing its magic. It still was. It was just having a different effect. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I know, what do you think about the shame and guilt thing in terms of the 9 obstacles?
Where does it fit?
Yeah. I thought like in part, it's like in the mischievous mind part, which we've been trying to talk about. So that's why I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
It kind of fits within that, but it's not obviously anywhere. But I begin to think it kind of permeates maybe through a lot of them
It
because you,
permeates through a lot of them. I mean, like when they talk about this, when the burdens of karma are great, you will need to repay what you have owed in previous lifetimes. And I don't, there's a couple different ways that we've taken that conversation, or that paragraph. But you took that one as like what you try to set time for your cultivation. Your aging parents will make you feel guilty about abandoning them. Although you want to cultivate, you're unable to find the time. Being smothered by parental demands is a second obstacle. So that one straight up says guilt right in it. You know
yeah.
what I'm
So I
saying?
think it's like, I think it's in the, you can feel guilt in front of your family. You can feel guilt in front of your partners, family, your
Mm-hmm.
current family now, in front of your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Feel guilt in front of your work. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't do enough. I didn't whatever. You can be self-reproaching about that. Like a lot of these things, I think
Mm-hmm.
it kind of like filters through as these toxic emotions that are kind of just like sliding through all over the place, kind of.
Yeah. And then, so that's kind of like the love and family work stuff. Then there's also the one that we did a little while back talking about material goods and fame. It said when you are rich and powerful, you'll
Oh yeah.
find it difficult to give up material goods and fame, not being content with what you have. You will always want more. So therefore, you're suffering, you're longing. And inherent in that, at least in my purview, is the shame of not having those things because that's the inverted guilt of desire, right? That you don't have it, therefore I want it. I'm not full unless I have those things. And
Mhm.
I think we could easily make the leap, a logical one for the sake of argument, that shame is inherent in that, right? That you're
Or
not
like embarrassment or something.
sure. Yeah, I mean, however you want to do it, but it's a recoil, and then the response to that like energetic recoil that I don't have enough, I'm embarrassed, I need more, is to then reach, right? And
Having
reach for
conversation with
something.
someone over the weekend about this, where and I was trying to like talk her through it, but she was basically saying like she feels, the way I interpret it, I don't know if she would, but the way I looked at it is like she felt like she wasn't as successful as her siblings. So she's very successful. but she was comparing herself to her siblings, and she felt kind of embarrassed that she wasn't as successful as the sibling, you know? And I was like, okay, that's a kind of a variation on these kinds of feelings too, right?
Mhm.
But where are you going with the shame of the longing for it? Let me make sure I get, like the
That
entirety.
okay, so if you so we are and I was just having this conversation with a patient today. She's Hungarian. She's in this lives in this country now, but that like mm, it even in Europe and even in because we have some probably about a quarter to a third of our audience is international, some in Europe, some in South America.
Mhm.
But for modernized Western-esque cultures, it's similar. It's similar. Cultures are a little bit different, languages are different, foods are different. Okay, fine, whatever. But generally, it's a very similar sort of work, grind to the wherever the top is for you, but buy some things you like. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Yield or market your skills, build some skills, sell them to somebody, sell your time, sell. Okay, fine. This is the marketplace that it's always been, but it's even more so now because the bottom is much further down because we are not able to grow our own food. We're not able to live off the land. Like that's not going to happen. Our family might not even take us in if we needed it. So you have to really grind, actually. You
Mhm.
really have to
Yeah.
grind on a regular basis. But inherent in that, inherent as Robert Thurman would call it, in advertising is a meditation on desire. And
Mhm.
if you think about marketing and commercials and whether they be print or on television or wherever, they're always telling you about a need that you don't have, something
Maybe
that's
like
going to make you better.
maybe like an inadequacy or something or
Yeah,
some, yeah,
sure. If they're
or
selling beauty products or clothing, absolutely. Or the new stylish thing, like someone snaps a finger and someone goes from being dressed like a homeless person to a, rich guy with a suit on. And now all of a sudden, he's getting all the chicks or dudes or whatever he's into. You know what I'm saying? And
yeah,
so
yeah.
it makes you feel like you're not enough. And at least in my mind,
There's a truth to that. This
when
kind of
you're not enough,
inadequacy and that shame around that inadequacy.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, that you're not enough. So therefore, you are not full. So you need this thing that I have. But until you have this thing that I'm going to sell you or whatever, there is a bit of a latency gap, before you have it and then until you get it. And in that latency gap is you and your shame for not having it. What the fuck is wrong with you? Here, let me help you. Levi's, get that ass right, or I don't know I don't think that's their motto, but like,
I don't think their motto is get that ass right.
right. But okay, and maybe
But you
Apple
might got,
bottom jeans from back in the day, Nelly's clothing brand or something like this. You know what I'm saying?
uh,
Um, so that's how I take that. That's how I would say that
yeah,
is.
there's a truth in that, right? That you can feel kind of a shame of inadequacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shame of not like having what you're supposed to have or something, yeah, to feel good about yourself or
I mean,
something. It's kind of
is
like a
it
shame almost of like you're not good enough,
right? I mean, that's
right?
and it's such an innate human thing, or at least modern human thing. That's why, flexing on Instagram is popular, right? Everybody wants that thing. And so they're able to parlay that into likes and followers, which they can then what? Sell advertising. That's how you make your money.
So the thing that got me about it, like, okay, so since we're really got like a couple of propositions of what these things are obstacles to, they're obstacles to like, am I changing the subject matter before I should?
No, you're good.
Okay. So I mean, I'm curious what you think, because they're obstacles to a certain kind of psycho-spiritual development. And we've tried to use different words for this. Carl Rogers words, right? Authenticity. Wilhelm Reich, you get out of the emotional plague, you learn how to love, you learn how to give, you learn how to share, in different ways, right? That's more his view of human nature at the core, right? Um, or Carl Jung, his individuation idea. So we throw in these different psych ideas out. Uh-huh.
Eric, is that what you before as you move into that? I just want to ask because it was earlier on my mind when when you would say like shame and guilt as a result of those things,
Uh-huh.
what just briefly, unless you're going to go there and open it up because I don't know exactly where you're heading. would you say that those are some antidotes to deal with that? Because we're talking about it, but I wanted to give people at least some taste who are, for our audience who is
Yeah, I
listening.
mean, I suppose for me, like, I guess the point I was trying to make was I'd done these meditations before. When they
Mm-hmm.
would talk about these negative feelings, I was feeling them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I did it again. I still felt the meditation worked. I felt the influx, right? And it was very clarifying. But at the end, I realized, like, well, I don't feel these shames and guilts. And I would feel those things before, and I would do purification practices and I would feel them.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, so what's the difference? And the thing that seemed to fix it was I'm more real now. So I don't find myself in situations where I'm like, where I feel awkward, or like I feel like I'm, doing something that's not true to others because I'm not being true to myself, which I think that's how I would find myself in. I wasn't being true to myself enough, so I wouldn't be able to be true to others enough. And then I would feel uncomfortable or bad about the situations. But as I got more real for myself and really more embodied the personal identity and maybe the psycho-spiritual identity, that I wanted more, then I just found myself not in these situations. And so I don't feel bad about stuff, you
Mm.
know? And I guess I'm presenting that as kind of an antidote.
So
The
your
more real
antidote would
I
be,
got, the less and the more I real I got with other people, the less I found myself in situations I would have to feel bad about.
got it. So you're saying for people to be or to try and work on their own sense of authenticity and internal congruency as a means to sort of even out this sense of shame and guilt that they might have if they are not acting in accordance to their own internal compass or something like that.
But also, like, when you're more congruent with yourself and you make the point of, like, I'm going to be honest and congruent with others, which is hard. That's very hard.
Right.
I mean, I think that's part of the picture too, for at least, in my experience of this, and other people can contemplate for themselves. You realize, like, well, I'm not really being straight with this partner. What I'm really feeling is not what I really feel, or how this isn't real. I'm not being real with a friend. I'm not being real with a family member. Like, you find yourself in situations that are more uncomfortable
Mm,
because they're just, again, they lack that genuineness or authenticity because you're out of harmony with yourself and you're not being harmonious with other people. And then those
mm,
awkward situations show up, and then you feel like, oh, I wish I would have handled that differently or handled that better, or uh, yeah, I handled this whole series of things wrong. But when I, at least for me, as I was self-reflecting on this after doing this particular meditative thing and really feeling the difference, it was because, yeah, there was a whole congruency problem, an incongruency with myself, and therefore an
right,
incongruency
right, right.
with others, and it's fucked.
It's kind of
And it
like
made me, it made me wonder, like, okay, is that a cure to some of this? But it's hard. You have to be honest with yourself, and you have to be honest with other people.
being an out of key instrument in an orchestra, you know?
Yeah. Hmm.
It doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like sounding out.
Yeah.
But I mean, how often are people? I mean, like, we could be honest about it. Like, how often are people feeling this way? And I was talking with the guy I was talking with today. He was like, "Well, yeah, I mean, I have to be more honest with my partner and say how I really feel about things, and not be disingenuous about that, or I have to be more honest with friends or family." We were just talking about this whole issue, and then all of a sudden, these situations aren't as cringy, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a and I've never read it, so if some of our audience has read it, feel free to correct me in the comments or via scathing email at ginandtantra@gmail.com. That was a subtle drop. No, but I think there's a book. A friend of mine leads a men's group, kind of based around this work called No More Mr. Nice Guy. That's the name of the book. And I think that's going into that what they're talking about in that work is that these people are the men in this particular case are being the nice guy, but they're not being themselves. And that then leads to other issues further down the road because that's not who they are. Yeah, they're a nice person, but they're also not being real. They're
Well,
being correct to the situation in what they think should be, but not what is.
yeah, my own experience of that is more like matching up with what Reich is talking about. The more I felt like I was being myself, actually, the better I got.
Yeah.
More generous, more loving, more whatever. Like, it
Hmm.
actually got better. And I would find myself in less situations where I was like, ugh, you know, um, where I would look back at myself and, like, I don't like the way I'm acting in this situation, but it more had to do with my own lack of internal thing and then lack of it with other people, that you'd find yourself in things that were awkward. I think
So
people are
then,
lying to each other all the time. Let's be honest. I think people are
totally.
hitting each other all the time.
So then,
You
what do
know?
you, Eric? What do you think then? Because like we want to be mm, beneficial for the people who are listening, and I'll ask you, and then I'll answer. Like, the answer is it's a process first, and then I'll ask the question. What do you think goes into increasing your own internal congruency? Right. So we're talking about being more in line with your authentic self, more in line with who you are. Right. But that's like I said, the answer is it's a process. But just for yourself, you have this meditation, some other meditations, but what else do you think, that you have experienced that has helped you, has been useful for you in this window? You know what I'm saying? That has helped you to feel like, oh yeah, this is me. This seems how I feel too. You know what I'm saying? It's not just a teaching that you've read, but that something that you've taken in is like, oh wait a minute, no, that's also me. That shit is not, but that stuff is, and now I'm putting together my own story for myself. But.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to answer it without like referencing a lot of the other stuff we've talked about, but I was very persuaded by like this Carl Rogers idea, like sometimes you have aspects of yourself, this self-concept thing that are kind of not you,
Sure.
and you're putting them out there. And then I think there has to be a thing of like starting to recognize that and call that and say, no, that's not real.
Yeah.
And then I think, I'll try to talk about as many different angles, honestly, as I can. I think part of it was like going, okay, what do I really spiritually believe in? You know,
Mm,
and that helped to clarify it. And I think as I got more into, in my case, the Buddhist tantras, I was like,
mm,
okay, this is more home base for me. And now I'm gonna like, it wasn't in a forced way. I'm not going to make myself be this thing because there's parts of the Buddhist tantra things where I'm like, I'm not going to follow that
sure.
verbatim. But the general vibe was in that direction. And then I was like, okay, so I'm going to start letting my internal world adjust to that, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and starting to be more consistent in that. Maybe it's true for a lot of us, the two of us, and a lot of other people too. I wanted to know what was true. I had a big thing of deciding what was true, and I felt like, okay, this is more what I think is true, or at least true for me. I can't say it's true for somebody else, but certainly seems more true to me. And then once that was clarifying, then I could be more. Uh, I felt more at home in who I was as a spiritual being then too, as well as the psychological part. And
Yeah.
then my values were more congruent with that.
Yeah.
Using the word congruent a lot, I guess today. That's
Yeah.
the word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Letter C was on Sesame Street. Letter C. The word is congruent. And or you could play a drinking game. Have a shot
Yeah.
every time we say congruent.
Yeah.
But
They'd be vomiting
you'll
by
be
at this point, Eric,
you'll be
for sure.
wasted by the end of
Yeah,
this.
100%. Like you are.
But it's like that seems to be the word of the day. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm gonna like make who I am kind of fit. Um, it wasn't forced. It was like, yeah, okay, so this is more my vibe.
Yeah.
And then finding that I didn't have to force, maybe it's the opposite. I didn't have to force things so much.
Mm,
I found myself in situations where I could be more honest with people. Okay, this is what I think, and then you find yourself in less situations where you're like, ugh, you know. Uh, what struck me about this too, and I don't know how it fits into exactly the question, but it was something I wondered about ever since I was a teenager. I had seen Joseph Campbell do this thing on Channel 11, which is public television in Chicago.
yeah.
And when he went through the temptations of the Buddha, and I was talking with Ryan Davenport about this, and he was like, "Oh, really? That's the third one?" And I said, "Yeah." When they did it, when Campbell did it, he said the first one was sort of more having to do with fear, big emotion, right? Second one had to do with more like desire, and I think it was sort of like especially sexual desire. Second big temptation. So Buddha's under the tree, and then all these horrible looking creatures come. He's supposed to be afraid. Is the way the story's told, but obviously it's
Yeah.
about fear. The second one is more about like out of control desire. If you're a tantrika, you're more like desire that has meaning and purpose and direction, but this is sort of more like out of control, just out of control desire. But the third one was I realized this is about guilt. It's about shame and guilt because the third one is like the voice that says, "Well, aren't you disappointing your father?" Obstacle number two.
Mm,
Aren't you going to be a disappointment to your wife and your son? Obstacle number three. What about what you're supposed to do for the kingdom? And whatever, maybe that's obstacle number four in your career or something like that, or whatever
mm-hmm.
you want to make it. Like he gets
Mm-hmm.
pounded by these guilts, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And, when I thought about myself after doing this particular meditation, I was like, yeah, there's something that's such a toxic and powerful emotion. Those emotions, guilt and shame, they're so bad, right? That's the third one. That's the tough one. That's the one that's tougher than the fear, tougher than the even desires. It's the guilt and the shame one. That's the
Mhm.
one that will eat you away. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I thought about that story in a new way. I've always thought about that third one. It's always resonated with me that Joseph Campbell said it that way.
Mm.
If we said it a different way, I wouldn't have been as interested in Buddhism. But the way he said it, like, hit home in so many different ways that he felt the societal pressures. Obviously, I have a thing with that. But as I was flipping it, thinking about it, now I was thought, well, that's about guilt a lot. You'll disappoint your dad who wants to be the king. What about that? You know, what about the other things that you're supposed to feel guilty about? People you're disappointing, people who, are unhappy with what you're doing. What about those people? Don't you feel guilty? Don't you feel shame?
Mhm.
So I thought, okay, yeah, I don't feel as much of that. And it has to do with the idea of like, okay, let me more explore inside, I guess, if that's the question you're asking in the beginning. So I get a better sense of who this is. Those things that are false, I better start getting rid of them. I better get a spirituality that I feel good and congruent about, something that I can follow. Like if I was still
Yeah.
following Christian shit, I'd probably be ashamed all the time, but I'm not. So I don't feel ashamed. You know what I mean? I left
Mhm.
that stuff. I found a spiritual path that was more my own.
Right.
So now I don't feel like it's forced or I have to feel, oh, bad. I don't feel the Christian enough Catholic feeling that I'm supposed to feel or something. Cause
Mm.
I left that. I checked that out. I'm in a spiritual headspace that's more true to me. Right. So now I don't have to feel bad about that. Oh, I'm being like a bad Catholic. I don't feel those feelings, they're gone too, because there's a more of again, a congruence. Take a shot.
Mhm.
But you look at that and you're like, maybe those are part of the solutions of how this works, right?
Sure.
And then you have to be honest with the people around you, maybe then too, which is hard. That's very difficult because the people around you may not like what you're saying. But
Well,
can you
that
can you
was a
say the truth to other people?
well, that's a question for sure. Is
Yeah.
like what what do you tell people who have a who are listening to this and have a shift in congruency, shot time, um, and then they're like, okay, they feel more at home within themselves. Their internal resonance is like, equalized, if you will. And now the way that they see things is different than those who they have surrounded themselves by, or they're in some particular situation and have to, now share things that are different than they were previously, and that their newer thoughts might not resonate well with those in their inner circle, and that can cause strife. It's how is it that you would think about helping those people in that situation? Because I think anybody who goes under a process of transformation will do what they seek to transform. Now, how far they get, or what how even knows what far means in that
Mm.
sense, but you're going to be different. And the people around you, especially as time goes on and you don't see them as much, are going to notice your difference even more than you will probably, and your views are going to change. And if you're, we grew up in, our families of origin, we no longer share their religious beliefs, en masse. Of course, there are some pieces, of course, that that translate over all religions, really, in my opinion, love and compassion and selflessness and whatever. But there are going to be other specifics, especially probably related to like this idea of shame, guilt, and some moral things and some maybe chauvinistic things that I'm just like, no, I don't, no, sorry. And the particular aspects of a story that I'm like, I don't need that story to believe the thing. You could just tell me the lesson and I can take, what I'm saying? Like, I don't need all the other hoopla. But for a lot of people, no, 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 no. They need that. That is part of it. That is it. You cannot remove those things. And so now you have interactions with people, and even though you're not with animosity inside, what you believe and what you're expressing does not concur with what they believe and what they're expressing, and there can be a total disconnect. And even though you are congruent within yourself, you have to be able to be comfortable in a situation where others are going to feel incongruent with your newfound congruency.
Wow, that's a double shot right there.
Yeah, double shot for sure. Yeah, hopefully you're drinking that homemade hooch you made in the bathtub last week,
Yeah,
Um,
it's like uncorking more and more.
but you
Uh,
understand what I'm saying though, right?
yeah, no, I totally get it. And like, I mean, this is where, I mean, when you really think like where the rubber hits the road,
Yeah.
this is where you really have to ask yourself a kind of a deep question of like, where do your values lie?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, my values lied in like doing this spiritual thing. That's where my values were and have been. So it took a bit, maybe, but I also got to the point where, like, yeah, people are going to fall by the wayside.
Mm.
In the tantras, it's very funny because they have that whole bit of like, don't hang around with like those people who are not in the tantric world,
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
Brahmakas or whatever, right? How they phrase it.
Yeah.
And these are like even like other Buddhists.
Right. Yeah. They're they're not
It's like
exactly
a variation on the Buddhist thing.
right.
Like, okay, that's pretty tough. But like there is something about like, having the people around you be the actual people who are congruent with who you are at the core of who you are. And I don't know what I mean, it's a tough call, but I mean it does, then the universe is asking you a tough question. It's basically saying like, who are you? Right.
Yeah.
And like, where do your values lie? Like if this particular friend doesn't fit into how you think, you may not be able to be friends with that person ultimately. And I can say, as this process is like, we'll say process again. We won't make another drinking game out of that because that would just be too much.
Yeah. That's too much.
You want to like alcohol poisoning people.
Yeah, for sure.
But when you get to like that thing, I mean, I can think of people who people I still say mantras for every day that I'll probably never really have a real conversation with again in my entire life. But people who meant something to me very deeply at like one particular point in my life, who were not the same anymore. It's over. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not like I don't appreciate and have gratitude for what the person did for me at the time when they were a core part of who I was and a core part of my life. And we were close. I mean, people really close, Daniel. We were like, no, we don't see the world the same way anymore.
You're like, sorry, mom, you're out of here.
Well, a little bit. A little bit. I'll still help my mom out. But
Yeah.
now, with my mom, it's interesting because my mom, I like, even with this uniqueness versus exclusive, my mom knows that I'm like, I don't believe in these things intrinsically. We talk about that shit all the time. But that's being congruent. Like it's that I didn't hide that from my mom. It eventually
Right.
became a point of conversation. I would say, well, how do you think about your relationship with dad? Do you feel like it was the right thing to do? And she'd be like, well, maybe people aren't supposed to be together forever. Maybe this wasn't that great. And we talk honest, you know? And once the honesty happens, I've had it with a number of family members. So you could tell the people where it's going to stick because eventually you get to an honest place. I think my brother would be okay with me talking about this part because he's a very private person. But when my uncle was sick a few years ago, we spent a lot of time together and we just found this place of like exquisite honesty with one another. The bullshit fell away and we found it. And we don't have to feel the same thing. We're not reliant on one another like the way it would be if we were, romantic partners or, we're siblings. We can have our differences, our lives don't maybe impact each other that much, now in our adult lives, but we're fucking honest as can be. It's very beautiful. And we were talking about just within the past week or so, and we were saying, well, what happened with our relationship? And we both kind of got to this place of agreeing, like we got to this place where the bullshit fell away, and now we're honest with one another. And now the relationship is great, because the crapola is gone, and he can be who he is and I can be who I am. And we talk an honest thing with one another. I don't know. But maybe you don't feel that as much. I feel there's so much bullshit between people. Do you feel that way?
Yeah,
Maybe you don't.
so
I do.
so
You
I
know?
think I think in response to my own prompt about
Okay, you got a
sharing.
lot to talk about rather than just talking about this is bullshit. Yeah, well, let's hear the whole thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so what came to me was that these are aspects of emancipation.
Yeah. I think we agree.
That as you come to a deeper sense of, connectedness with yourself, your actions, all the various aspects of yourself, your feelings, your words, your actions, your thoughts, all this kind of stuff. We're always, I think, trying to get those things to be cohesive. And that once you are moving in that direction, then your beliefs are going to change, your feelings are going to change, your actions, your words, so on and so forth. and that they might not fit with your family of origin or a group of friends, or your interests might change, what you prioritize in your life might change, and expressing those to people around you uh, is inevitably going to be difficult, as I have had many difficult conversations with my family. You have many difficult conversations with your family, and also longtime friends, very close people, very
Yeah.
close people. Like you said, people who you pray for on a regular basis. Probably, if you do talk to them, it will be a long time from now, and whatever,
Or the conversations are just formal. They're not
right.
real.
They're not right. They're not real. But that, like, if you are moving towards emancipation, you're freeing yourself from the being that you are not, and you are becoming more of who you are, then those around you should be happy for you and to be able to hold space for where you're coming from, even if they disagree, even if it's a disagreement. And this is the hardest part for me, is that as I am expressing things that, I believe and I feel as they believe and they feel, I don't look at them any different for their belief, even if it stayed the same since I was younger or they were younger or whatever. But it's unfortunately not met on the reverse side all the time. It isn't. And there is judgment and resistance. And then there is that little poker of what? Shame and guilt. And
Yeah.
for me, if I am in a more congruent place with myself, and I have found a synthesis of philosophies that live inside of me more harmoniously, and that improves my life, then those people around me, regardless of their own ideologies, should be happy. They should be able to hear what I have to say and feel what I have to share, and not hold it against me because it is not in line with what they believe.
So, I mean, I agree with you. I think the weird thing from if it's like a tangential person,
No, I'm
fine.
talking about close people,
It
because
has to be
random
people who are
randos, who
close. You know what I
cares,
mean? If you get to people who are more tangential in your existence, you can kind of be like, okay, well, we don't say the same things. We'll talk about the Bears drafted Caleb Williams. That's fine.
Yeah, that's
He's
cool.
the
Yeah.
quarterback of the Bears. We'll
Yeah.
bullshit about that. That's fine. When you get to people who are really close, like romantic partners, close family members, really
Close
close,
family members. Yeah.
where like, these things are, you're impacting each other. What they do impacts you, what you do impacts them.
Yeah.
Your romantic partners, your close family, your close friends, that's a serious Buddhist tantric problem. There's no way around that. That's a
Hmm.
real thing. And I don't know the answer to it, except that in my own model of, you know, we're all building our own spiritual realities. We're all building, I like to think of it like we're all building our own stages of the path, right?
Yeah.
You know, so when I look at it, like if I look at it really honestly, I think those people you better be in the same headspace with. You better be somewhere where you can occupy the same headspace with. Otherwise, I think you do have a sangha problem,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Like if you want to go this way and this other person wants to go this way, it's going to cause you some hassles. It's no
And
doubt.
and
And
we
but I think
did
that, yeah,
we did an episode on, or Priscilla and I did an episode on Sangha called The Community a few weeks ago. So for those who are interested in, deeper dive on Sangha, then they could check
yeah.
that one out.
I mean, I think that might actually have to be the case. Like if you don't get close to the same wheelhouse, you
Yeah,
know, it's going to be a problem. I guess it's kind of like trying to raise kids with someone that you don't see the world the same way. That
totally.
fucked. Like that's not good. I won't talk in too much detail about it, but I happened to talk to an old friend, and like eventually it was like, oh, man, he and his wife don't see the world the same way
Yeah,
at all. You know, and I mean, it's a problem. You can
yeah.
imagine a situation, one person's all GOP, the other person's all on the left. How are you going to raise a kid? You can't. But the thing
Libertarian.
that centrists, we're the centrists.
We're the centrists. We don't like anything or anyone ever.
Well, like everything's supposed to be a centrist now in
Right, right.
America. Everything's polar. So I'm the centrist. Who knows where the fucking centrist is?
They don't exist.
I'm in the center. I mean, like the thing that struck me as kind of tragic about it too, and I had like I think you have to face it. Like let's say you really have a desire to be a spiritual person, like that's really where your jam is. You can find yourself in situations with people with it'll hold you back. I can't lie.
Right.
It'll hold you back, you know? So, you have to like give people the chance to evolve with you, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's true. That's true. You do
You
have
give
to
people
give.
the
Yeah.
chance to evolve with you. But I mean, if I definitely have had the experience like, oh, this person isn't going to evolve with me.
Yeah.
Ain't going to happen. Like dear friends, where I'm like,
I
God,
agree. I
look,
agree. I
this
agree.
isn't going to happen. This person is not going to evolve with me.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a childhood friend right now.
And I'm like, okay, then I guess that's how this is.
Yeah.
The weird thing for me that I've been thinking about a lot in the past, there's a kind of a special little window of time in the little Buddhist calendar where we had like one of the bliss days over the weekend, but it was also one of these days where it's sort of this little period where it's supposed to acknowledge the Buddha's birth and enlightenment and then passing on. They choose this sort of this little symbolic window. But usually that means there's some good vibe energy going on during that period. You can feel a little insightful. And I did feel insightful. And I was like, I was going, yeah, this is really tough. But if you're if you go back to your core and your core is like, let's say you're listening to this and like, okay, I want to psycho spiritually develop myself. Or like even you get ambitious. I want to be enlightened. I want to try to go for the deep ideas. If the people around you aren't in that same headspace, it's a real problem. I can't lie. It's a real deep problem.
Hmm.
You know? Yeah, yeah. I don't know what to say about it, except I think that that's true.
Yeah.
And
My partner likes to say, your vibe attracts your tribe.
yes, there you go. Right. Or
Hmm.
not. And that depends on whether you're congruent,
Well,
right?
right. But
If
you'll
you're
attract other non-congruent people.
yes.
So it's a
Or
bunch of,
I mean, to be honest about it, or you'll just track the people who are wrong. Like they're not the right folks because you're not putting out who you really are.
right.
You're attracting folks who are like basically if you go Carl Rogers, they're latching onto your self-concept. The false one.
The false one. I
The
think
false one. They're latching onto the false concept. And then like that's the people who are around you. And they're gonna want you to be true to that false concept.
over the years, I can
Situation.
say that has been the biggest turnoff for me,
Oh yeah, yeah.
for sure. The biggest
When,
turnoff.
when people have like a false concept and you find out that it's false.
No, 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 no. People who are attracted to my false concept
Well, it's a problem.
because it's a reminder that I have one,
Mm,
and that a reminder that like that's totally not me.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's of course it's an aspect we all have, how we present, how we look, what we're attracted to, or in terms of like our own style, or
Yeah, 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 yeah.
this kind of thing.
It's
You're
like a
you're
persona thing, kind of,
Yeah,
right?
like a
Yeah,
persona thing, but there's also aspects of that are a projection of your kind of like false self.
yeah, yeah.
And when people over the years have been attracted to that part, or they say, "Oh, I bet you do blank," or "I bet you're like blank," and it's so off,
Yeah,
you're like, "No, you don't see me at all.
yeah.
I remind you of somebody else." There's a story here that we probably should wrap because for time purposes, but it's a good one. So I was in a community college in a small suburb outside of Illinois when I moved back to the Chicagoland area after I lived in California and got out of the military. And so I was taking this adult development psychology course. And there's a very smart African American lady who was in the class with me, and we sat next to each other in most of the classes, and we always had good conversation. And she's like, "Look, Daniel, I got two kids and a baby daddy, but I just want to tell you, I like your brain." And I said, "Oh well, thank you so much." She's like,
Uh-huh.
"I'm going to introduce you to my friend. She's super tall, really pretty, really nice gal, was in the Navy. I'm going to introduce you." So I never met her. So it was a blind date. So we met up and went out and hung out a couple times, and it was fine. And one night she came over and she worked later. She was a nurse and she worked a bit later. Um, and she's like, "Hey, I'm really hungry." And I was like, "Oh, well, there's nothing around here. We're in these like suburbs. I was living with my father before I moved into the city proper." I
Yeah,
was like,
everything closes at like 9.
exactly. And this was probably
Yeah.
about like 9:15, 9:30. And I was like, there's a Wendy's. There's a Wendy's down the road. Wendy's is a fast food restaurant for those who don't know, but I'm assuming most do. So we went and she ordered, whatever, hamburger, fries, and a soda, whatever, a meal. And they said, "Okay, and what kind of drink would you like, ma'am?" and she um said Dr. Pepper. And then she turns to me in this really interesting but super cringy way, and she said, I like my pop dark and my men white.
Oh God.
And I just like I just sort of like, she was leaning over me because I'm driving. And so she just like turned her face towards me as she was leaned over. And I just like shrunk back in the seat and got like really small and
You
really
started hitting
low.
that zing.
Yeah, I like trying to lay the seat back. I'm like, I hope no one sees me. I really hope that dude didn't hear that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you want to talk about shame, guilt, and embarrassment? It was like all the way at the roof. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But at that moment, I realized that like what the other person had seen in me, what she said, I like your brain. That's what she liked, my mind. And this person maybe did. I don't know. Who knows? She doesn't have class with me, so she doesn't see me in that way. Saw me and wanted to hang out with me because of how I appeared to her and her sexual preference, which we're all entitled to have for sure.
Yeah.
But at that moment, I realized that like I was a stereotype, or I was, a symbol of something that she enjoyed, but that actually wasn't me. It was such a huge turnoff. So, anyways, there's a real story from Daniel's life. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's the adventures of Daniel. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
You know, I think like the deepest loves you can have is for someone's mind.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
That's the deepest loves. And as far as it goes, like, that feeling of whether it's incongruence, one more time, the episode's going to end. You got that like closing time. You got to get those last drinks in.
Yeah,
When you really think about it, I don't know. I've been thinking kind of deep. And if you get someone, like the Carl Jung, different people have different orientations towards the world. Type 1 people are struggling to get themselves stable. Type 2 people are like more in the societal domain, right? Type 3 people are creative, breaking out. We were talking about that last week. Type 4 are more psychospiritual or something. Anyways, if you look at that, I think if you want to be a type 4 person and your peeps you're with are like type 2s, it's going to be hard. I just don't
yeah,
see around that. It's going to be really hard because then it's not Sangha, you know? So maybe as you find out who you are, you find, more what you believe, you start to like find the people who are supportive of that.
yeah.
It's not easy to do this shit anyways,
No.
but if you're not getting support or you're not in congruence with the people within your circle, right? That gets really hard.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get dragged off in other directions, right? Because the momentum of those people will carry you off in other ways,
Totally.
especially if you're being led by, what we were talking about, like you're being led by your self-concept, which isn't you, the false part of who you are. We'll go along with that. And the next thing you know, you're in some fucked up thing. And bleh.
And
Yeah.
and Eric, that's the seventh obstacle.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay. To be continued,
that's right.
number 7. But it is like, it's not, it's a big deal, right?
Got to
It's a
be
big,
you,
yeah, you got to do it.
whoever the fuck you
Gotta be
are.
congruent. One more shot. No, and I think like the big thing to like pull it all together when I was doing this 72 names of God, I was like, okay, I don't feel these things because I'm not in these terrible situations anymore where I feel like I'm not being who I am. And then the other person is interacting with some false version of who I am and everything's fucked up. Then
Yeah,
you feel bad about it. You find yourself doing things that you feel bad about.
yeah,
So the whole thing isn't like fitting up. All right. Anyways, I think it's a good conversation, right? I think we got
yeah,
some stuff that,
yeah, yeah, for sure.
some of the meditative stuff, like the 72 names, will clarify this. Some of the things is like more like that psychological filtering. Who am I really?
Mm-hmm.
What do I really believe? I don't really believe this. I got to get rid of this stuff.
Yeah,
Stuff has to go. Try to tap into the core things of how you feel. If there's psychological blocks, we've talked about people like how you deal with like different kinds of psychological blocking, and then be honest with the people around you. You
yeah,
know, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
All
seems
right.
good.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, as always, thank you so much, my friend,
Thanks,
for
thanks, Daniel. It's a
joining me
deep
on the
conversation. Thanks for sharing.
on the train wherever we're headed. And thank you to our audience, whether you're listening or watching, or maybe doing both, combination of both. You're doing the dishes or driving, and you have us on the screen, and it's pumped through your Bluetooth, and you're doing all the things, or it's on mistakenly because you thought it said gin and tantra was something else, but you're still here, and if you made it to the end, welcome to the top 10% of attention spammers, spanning people. I don't know, whatever. So good work. Give you kudos for doing that. And as always, we want to thank our sponsors. Oh, that's right. That's us. We are not sponsored by anybody except ourselves. So, we appreciate just people sharing our work. That's really what it's about. So like, comment, subscribe, leave leave a little comment if you want. And the Instagram at Gin and Tantra Podcast, or hit us up at ginandtantra@gmail.com. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.